Hello everyone, this is a micro-teaching video on the topic Dimension of Gandhism, the conflicts of micro-narratives in anti-colonial Indianness, submitted for the refresher course in Indian Knowledge Systems in Skill-Based Curriculum, conducted by UGC MMTTC Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar, Aurangabad. And I am roll number 11. I am Surina Mol R. I work as an assistant professor in Department of English, Govt KNM Arts and Science College under University of Kerala. The aim of this micro-teaching video is to understand integration of Indian knowledge system with Western theories using the many dimensions of Gandhism. So first of all, let us understand the prime principle of Gandhism. Gandhi's ideas focused on holistic education, that is the unification of mind, body and spirit, which is a pivotal principle in Indian knowledge system and which can actually contribute to community engagement and self-reliance. And Gandhi's idea has a lot to offer in the present day crisis that we face in our world. It has a lot to offer in the area of ecological balance, equitable growth, and it addresses such global issues by combining the traditional indigenous or traditional Indian knowledge systems with modern approaches. In this lecture, I will be analyzing the many dimensions of Gandhism that has numerous micro-narratives embedded in it. Essentially, this concept of micro-narrative and meta-narrative is postmodern. We know that it comes from Lyotard's postmodern theory. So here, I will be looking at the many dimensions of Gandhism that has numerous micro-narratives embedded in it. And Gandhi has actually fought the meta-narrative of colonialism with these various micro-narratives that are derived from Indian epistemologies. So what is the meta-narrative of colonialism? So it all comes from the British perspective. For example, the Britishers justified their power, their colonial rule using some principles, some meta-narratives like that the West is the civilized nation against the East, which is not civilized or savage, etc. So they have this additional responsibility to civilize the people in India, and it actually served or the purpose of cultural superiority, exerting cultural superiority over Indian people, and the wealth of Indian nation was continuously exploited by the Britishers. Using this kind of colonialism there acted as a meta-narrative. Under this vast background of resistance movement, I would be placing the dimension of Gandhism that has an important element, that is the anti-colonial Indianness. So the dimension of Gandhism that I would be talking throughout my lecture would be based on this anti-colonial Indianness. This anti-colonial Indianness is derived from three important principles of Indian philosophy. It is there in our Vedas, it is there in our Upanishads, in all our ancient Indian literature. So what are these three principles? One is truth. Truth is Sat, that is connected to our existence and ethical. And in Vedas, it is written that truth is a basic requirement for internal quest and self-realization. The second principle is non-violence. Non-violence is not simply hurting human beings. It extends to the non-humans. It extends to the more than human world. So according to the principle of non-violence, it is written in Vedas that all life is sacred. Even if it is a living being, even if it is other things like air, water, everything has life. So everything is sacred in Indian concept. The third is celibacy. Celibacy in simple language, it means sexual abstinence, but it has a wide connotation. It has an extended meaning. In Vedas, celibacy is related to aparigraha, that is a sense of non-possession, a kind of a detachment, which actually would make us to live a fearless life. And it also entails such concepts like living by ample needs, blending the spiritual and the material aspects, etc. And we must not seek, we must not seek for material benefits. So these three principles, truth, nonviolence, and celibacy, are actually embodied in the dimension of Gandhism that I would be speaking in this lecture, which talks about anti-colonial Indianness. One of the key features of Gandhi's anti-colonial Indianness is the integration of the local with the global. Gandhi was not at all digging up Indian traditions and he was saying that this is correct, this is the thing that we should follow. Gandhi's critique of Western modernity is a very interesting aspect that actually provides a kind of a vision of Indianness, which offers a rationalized explanation of Indian tradition that employs experimental validation. For example, when we think about Gandhi's autobiography, it's about it's titled as the My Experiments with Truth. What Gandhi was doing, he was actually um, reading the Indian traditions, reading the Indian philosophies, Indian epistemologies, and he was constantly experimenting with them. So this is a kind of an Indian tradition that employs experimental validation. It is not blind adherence to our traditional systems. Gandhi, he actually sought a kind of a rationalization through many experiments that he conducted. For example, he was against meat eating, and this meat eating entailed the principle of non-violence. And this principle of non-violence, which is something that lies in Indian philosophy. Principle of non-violence talks about the soul force that we need in our present day to live a balanced life. Then when we think about Satyagraha, Satyagraha was against the British industrial and exploitative regimes, which thoroughly underscored the agency of poor people. When we think about Swaraj, Swaraj is about the decentralization of power. The power must lie within the local people, or we must decentralize power to include the poor people in India. So when we think about Satyagraha, when we think about Swaraj, when we think about non-violence, we could understand an important fact that Gandhi enforced the lived, experienced and experimented facts of life. And he merged Indian spirituality with the global currents. It was not like Gandhi was actually talking about the Indian knowledge systems or Indian traditions. He merged the Indian philosophic systems, Indian ancient philosophic systems to the global currents. For example, Gandhi's experiences in South Africa actually modeled his Satyagraha in many ways. And when we think about Gandhi and Satyagraha, each Satyagraha of Gandhi has specific aims, and Satyagraha was a constantly evolving principle. And Gandhi lived many transcendental thought systems in the world. And his experience in London, his experience in Phoenix Farm, Tolstoy Farm, etc., actually shaped the Gandhian philosophy or his philosophy. So the feature of anti-colonial Indianness is integrating the ancient Indian system with that of the global current, and it is also prone to, or it is also subjected to, a kind of a rationalized explanation that employs experimental validation. Let us talk about Gandhian micronarratives that actually comes from this idea of anti-colonial Indianness. Gandhi's anti-colonial Indianness has a lot of micro-narratives embedded in it that acted against the ideological, structural and logical foundations of modernity. So in the previous slides, I talked about the meta-narrative of colonialism. The meta-narrative of colonialism is fundamentally built within the foundations of ideological, structural and logical foundations of modernity. And what Gandhi did through his anti-colonial Indianness was he was opposing these foundations of colonial modernity through many micro-narratives. So what is micro-narrative? Micro-narrative is not a Gandhian concept. It is actually a postmodern concept. Micronarratives are local contexts of interactions or practices and roles and relations negotiated by the individuals in the society. So it is negotiated by the individuals in the society. So this component of the individual is important. Next is micronarrative is plural. It is open to all genres of discourse. It is dialogic, and it enhances communicative interactions in the society. So this is a simple explanation of micronarrative. What we must understand about micronarrative is that it is a postmodern concept and it comes from Lyotard's postmodern theory. Lyotard says that micronarrative, or the characteristic feature of a micronarrative, is incredulity. And Lyotard again defines the postmodern condition, the postmodern, as the incredulity towards the meta-narrative. The postmodern condition is something that is drawn or that comes to the world because of the incredulity towards the meta-narratives. And Gandhian micronarratives that I will be focusing in this lecture is characterized by the feature of incredulity. Incredulity towards the colonial logics of modernity. And the Gandhian narratives that I will be elaborating in the future slides offer ideological, structural and logical incredulity towards colonial modernity. Now let us look at this notion of ideological incredulity and the different micronarratives connected with it. First is Sarvodaya. Sarvodaya is the micronarrative of emancipation that is almost thrice irrespective of caste, class, nationality, race, religion, etc. And in the celebrated work of Gandhi, Hind Swaraj, he criticizes capitalist neo-colonial policies, thus enforcing the notion of Sarvodaya. Next idea is Swaraj. Swaraj is the idea of fusion of East and West. Swaraj simply means self-rule, and it draws back the autonomy of soul in Vedic philosophy, especially the concept of Brahma, that is the ultimate realization of ourself, that is possible only through hard work and discipline. Then Swaraj, when we translate Swaraj in terms of the independence movement, it could be understood as the notion of it could be understood as against the notion of colonial administration. And Gandhi says that the specificities of socio-historic economic conditions will go with the making up of individual, and these specificities could help him master himself. So we must not imitate the West, and the West should not imitate the East. Each cultural, social, historic perspective is important for the growth of individual. So thus we can say that this idea of Swaraj, Sarvodaya, Swadeshi, etc. are essentially creative in nature, it is experimental, and it is continually revised one. So we can see that there is a renewal of India's cultural past here, for finding solutions of the injustices suffered by people in India under the colonial administration. Swaraj is also possible in a community. Gandhi endorses the idea of nation here. And Gandhi doesn't endorse the idea of nation here because it can be possible only by living in a community. And minimal government and local are prioritized here. So the next is Swadeshi. Swadeshi is a turn to one's own country. It essentially captures the notions of self-reliance. And Qadar here acts as a micro-narrative against the cultural hegemony of the West. Like Qadar, Gandhi also gives prominence to native languages. So a child should be taught in his or her native language. The native language should be used as a means of communication for education, etc. So against the adoption of English language, which essentially conveys the cultural ideals of another nation. Then village. Village was actually something very interesting in Gandhian philosophy because we know that the colonial practices has destroyed the village economy. So the Swaraj can only be brought in by incorporating this ideal of village. And when Gandhi supports this ideal of village, he means that we must return to cottage industries, we must implement agrarian economy, then sanitation, education, removal of untouchability, gender discrimination, etc. are also it is also supported by Gandhi because we can see that untouchability, gender discrimination, sanitation, education, these are essentially some of the problems faced by villagers because the poor people lived in villages. Then Gandhi's religion is also treated as a product of higher contemplation and imagination. Example, his views on non-violence and his views on violence, etc. Another example for Gandhi's religion is his Anasakti Yoga, that is a selfless action that also entails our imagination to understand the vast repository of Indian knowledge system. Then religious pluralism is another facet of his religion because he had borrowed vastly from Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Jainism and Christianity. Let's now look at the concept of logical incredulity that Gandhi offers against the meta-narrative of colonialism. And in this respect, we must understand the micro-narrative of science and history that he offers against the colonial modernity. So Gandhi's vision of science is not formulaic. It is not based on formulas. It is holistic. It means it is a kind of an integration among different disciplines like body, religion, culture, and ethics. And like the ancient Indian philosophic systems, ancient Indian knowledge systems, environmental, sustainable, holistic view of science is favored. For example, his many experiments with vegetarian diets, his prescription of nature cure treatments like Ayurveda, etc. Talks about this holistic view of science. Next, let us look at this concept of charka, then village industries, traditional ways of living, etc., which restores Indian civilization against the dehumanizing vision of science in modernity. We know that in the modern world, science was used to make bombs, science was used to destroy civilization, science was used in warfare, etc. Especially he was against the kind of the system of medicine that actually killed animals to make medicines. He said that it is important to reform our lifestyle rather than making medicines by killing animals. In the present day scenario also, this is important. That means we are facing a lot of lifestyle diseases and we are taking a lot of medicines. What is important is to reform our lifestyle rather than taking medicines, and these medicines comes by uh, killing these innocent animals for scientific experiments, etc. So he was against that. He was against the dehumanizing aspect of science. The next is Gandhi's concept of history. He actually prioritizes the narrative function of history, the so-called everyday history, and he questions the inherent prejudices in the Western system of knowledge that actually favored racist, gender-specific, and also it 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 never questioned the prejudices over sex, race, and gender. Gandhi was against, or Gandhi went against the colonial logics, and he recorded his everyday lived experiences. One of the another important thing about Gandhian sense of history is he always understood the role of subalterns in making up of history. That's why he opposed the concept of nation. That was a grand narrative inspired from British colonial movements. So, according to Gandhi, everyday life was a field of inquiry in his spirituality, in his politics, and in his system. So, next is how Gandhian narratives poses structural incredulity towards European modernity. And body could be viewed as a micro-narrative that Gandhi uses against the logic of European modernity. Body is not treated as a fixed entity. Gandhi offers biopolitics connected with body, because body is used by Gandhi in many of his colonial movements. He constantly experimented with his body, and the term satyagraha or satyagraha was on contemplation. It was a contemplation on diet, sex, and hygiene. Gandhi has also criticized over-indulgence of eating habits, and he prescribed a moderate diet for a satyagrahi, because moderate diet constantly empties ourselves. And body is also viewed as an obstacle separating man from infinite. Violence in colonial civilization is marked by spiritual dearth and increased affinity towards the commodities filling the body with the excess. So, this moderate diet, sexual abstinence, hygiene, exercise, etc. are prescribed to maintain the harmony of body and mind. Gandhi's nature cure, vegetarian diet, Ayurvedic system, it all casts suspicion over the modern ways of seeing body. Then when we think about spinning wheel, that is charka, this concept of charka is against the idleness of people, to make people vital, to make people energetic. Because the colonial administration has destroyed the village economy and made the people idle. So when Gandhi talks about spinning wheel, he actually makes people do activities. People do their duties, their jobs, rather than sitting idle. Then Brahmacharya was also not. It is about sexual abstinence, but in the context of pre-independent India, Brahmacharya had a lot to offer against child marriage and gender violence that were common during that time. Body is treated by Gandhi as a key to health and a symbol of non-violence here. Then, like the Vedic philosophy, like the Indian philosophy, mind and body is harmonized in Gandhian discourses, and this harmony of mind and body is connected to the notions of karma, artha, dharma, and moksha. It is also important to note that Gandhi never underscores the free will of the individual. That's why he constantly experiments with sexuality. Gandhi's views of sexuality also differs on many occasions. He widened the scope of sexuality to include feminine. So here in this slide we can understand that Brahmacharya is not about sexual abstinence. It is more than that. It includes the scope of feminine. It actually makes us experiment on sexuality, etc. Finally, Gandhi's concept of race. Gandhi tried to eliminate racial fixedness by transcending its barriers, by building up a civilization where there would be individual devoid of racial demarcations. Gandhi has also evaded the notion of racial purity by invoking the idea of civilization, a civilization that points us towards the path of duty. So in conclusion, we can say that Gandhi has integrated Indian knowledge systems in his anti-colonial intentness. However, he has broadened its scope through constant experimentation and through scientific validation, and he always casts suspicion over the logics of colonial modernity. Gandhism has a lot of micro-narratives embedded in it, deriving from the vast repository of Indian traditions that questions the meta-narrative of colonialism. Thank you.